Change isn't always bad, but then again, it's not always good either. And for better or worse, this show was a major change in a major way. Just 2 years after Batman the Animated Series ended, a continuation was commissioned. A sequel of sorts that intended on carrying out the show's legacy, but this time around doing things a little bit differently. And boy, did it. This is one of the most divisive shows, or seasons of this show, depending on how you choose to look at it. There are those who loved it, and those who hated it, with very few in between. A lot of people seem to think it's inferior to the actual animated series, but then there's also a few who actually think it's superior to that show in some other ways. Personally speaking, I don't really see this as being a better than or worse than scenario. At its core, this is the same show, just now in a different style with a different flair. The characters still feel like the characters that they've always been for the most part, but they don't necessarily look like the characters they've always been, for the most part. The art style had changed, and with it, so did the vast majority of characters' designs. There were of course some characters such as Two-Face, Harley Quinn, Clayface, Harvey Bullock, and to a slightly lesser extent Alfred, who went through minor changes. As a matter of fact, I don't know that I'd classify any of them as an actual change, because they're really just slight adjustments made to make these characters better fit in with the world around them. They had some detail removed in an effort to simplify their look. But then there are some of the more severe redesigns where the characters look drastically different from their original looks, some of which are straight up unidentifiable. It was a real mixed bag. And I don't know that I'd call all of these updates upgrades. The Riddler started off his short run looking like a distinguished gentleman who had an affinity for question marks. But the new Batman Adventures had a different approach to his attire. Suddenly he's lost his hair, which, hey, it happens. But he's also lost all of his previous wardrobe. There's also some added darkness underneath his eyes, which makes me wonder when he put down the ties and picked up the eyeliner. Replacing his suits was a spandex one-piece that feels more like a throwback to the 60s Riddler, that ultimately feels tonally out of place here, though he's not the only villain whose new look was actually an old look recycled. The Penguin, while always being the pompous prick that he was in the comics, originally had a much more decidedly DeVito look to him. Half a head of longer hair, flippers in the place of hands, those were traits the character never had prior to the Tim Burton films. So it was clear what their inspiration was. I think the clash in appearance and personality actually worked well for the villain, and I think Paul Williams' voice better complemented the first design than it did the second. It's not out of place here, but I just can't separate it from the original. So I wouldn't say that this design was reimagined so much as it was restored, replacing his flippers with fingers and making his appearance a little more proper and a lot less revolting, which was always the vision to begin with anyway. When Batman the Animated Series had come out, there was a little bit of a mandate at the time to try to better replicate what the movies had been doing, hence making the Penguin a Penguin Man. With the newer design, they went back to the 60s and deviated away from his Batman Returns look, though strangely enough, his partner in crime would go the opposite route, with Catwoman wearing an outfit very reminiscent of her Batman Returns look. Admittedly, not to the same effect. The problem is that she looks about as detailed as a silhouette when she steps from the shadows. I always thought the simplification of a lot of the female characters led to them losing the concept of their age. Poison Ivy and Catwoman always looked to be around the same age as Batman, but here they both sort of look like they could be the same age as Batgirl. I don't know, I think I liked it better when they looked like actual women and aging people. Additionally, when Selina's out of the costume, she's shown to have short black hair rather than her long blonde hair from the first season of the show, looking like a completely different person in and out of costume. Though she wouldn't be the only one. Nor is she the most out there change. Killer Croc, who once had gray, scaly skin, was now bright green. Maybe this better suits the character, considering he now more closely resembles a crocodile, but I think the previous design was a lot better. Whereas Penguin grew fingers, Killer Croc lost some of his, but gained claws. The look makes sense, but from a style standpoint, I think I prefer the original. While the two looks look nothing alike, both do seem reminiscent of the character's look in the comics, just in different ways. I think as the new Batman Adventures look kinda makes him look a little bit more like a lizard dude rather than a crocodile man. But it's Croc's part-time partner in crime here that may just have it the worst. Baby Doll, despite her name, always looked like a person. In this show, she actually looks like an actual baby doll. I just don't think that that's as effective when you're trying to tell human stories, but you're using a basic bargain bin plushie for your design. Not all the designs are terrible, though. Some are pretty passable. The Mad Hatter was redesigned to more closely resemble his namesake, that being the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland. And in trying to replicate that fairy tale, he shrunk a few feet and swapped his blue cosplay costume with a much more accurate green one. I wouldn't say that this was necessarily an improvement, but I think this version is just as valid as the one that came before it. It's not better, but it's fine, I guess. The ventriloquist somehow looks exactly the same and completely different all at the same time. I don't really know how else to articulate that. It's like taking two different artists' interpretation of the same character, except, well, it's actually the same artist. He fits in well with the new animation style. The design is fine on its own, but it's a downgrade to the original for me. But not by much. Poison Ivy seems a little more slim. Her natural skin color has been drained out, and now she's almost as white as the Joker. Her light green outfit has been replaced by a nearly identical dark green one. And yeah, this feels fine. I like both looks, not really one more than the other. This is alright. Though I will say a lot of the women all have the same exact height and frame. And that makes the characters feel a little bit less individual and more like standard prototypes that have only slightly been built on. Bane's gone from a luchador to a BDSM enthusiast. And, you know, it's fine. This Bane loses the nose hole in his original mask and gains a brand new spiked collar. While he certainly looks scarier, I don't know that I'd say this design is better either. But again, it's fine, and this is probably the least popular opinion I've ever had on anything at all, but I really don't see the Joker redesign as the blasphemy that a lot of fans do. Yes, it's a toned down, slimmed down, lipstickless clown prince of crime, but I think this look is still truly unsettling. His soulless black eyes perfectly complement his soulless black heart. They say that eyes are the gateway to the soul, and in that sense, Joker's eyes tell you all you need to know about him. So while it's not a popular opinion, I am not going to shy away from it. It is my opinion. I kinda dig this redesign. Is it perfect? No, certainly not. Is it an improvement? Well, again, I probably would have to say no, but I do appreciate it for what it is. While some of the characters' new appearances border on awful, others are downright awesome. The show didn't do all good on their big bads, but there isn't a hero that they didn't do right by. Batman loses his yellow emblem and has his bat logo enlarged, which I imagine makes it a little bit easier to lurk in shadow. The original look is probably a lot more iconic from a nostalgic standpoint, but the new Batman Adventures look just always seemed more legitimate to me. The gray and black complement each other so well without the yellow being in there to clash with the darker looks. I always thought the logo was a holdover from the Burton films, and that it may have overstayed its welcome. Although, again, that probably isn't one of my more popular opinions either. I'm not saying the original look was bad by any means. I'm just saying that I think this one is a lot better. As a matter of fact, this is one of my all-time favorite Batman looks to have ever been put to screen. It's so perfect in its simplicity. In contrast with that, though, I've never loved the overhaul they did with Bruce Wayne. He looks so bland and generic, whereas the original Bruce looked like an actual identifiable human being. This one looks about as dead in the eyes as the Joker. Similarly, Batgirl also gets a touch-up as well. Gone was her homemade bargain bin Batman costume, and in its place was a look that was uniquely its own. The yellow left the Bat logo on Bruce's suit, and made its way over to Barbara's where it was much more welcome. I could almost copy and paste my description of Batman's redesign and place it here because, once again, this is one of my favorite looks for this character. Even the Robin suit feels like an improvement over the original. Mr. Freeze looks a lot less like a man, and a lot more like a machine. And given the updates the show makes to his life, that makes sense. He's much more intimidating here than he's ever been physically. His trademark goggles were removed to show off his blood-red eyes. His attire looked similar to the one that he had prior, but it almost looked like this suit served purposes outside of just keeping him alive. Now it almost resembles armor, but everything I just mentioned is really window dressing for the real redesign here. Contrary to my opinion on the Joker's redesign, this is probably my most popular opinion, as it seems to be one shared by just about everyone involved in BTAS lore. The Scarecrow no longer feels like a man obsessed with fear. He feels like fear itself personified, a nightmare manifested and walking amongst men. Suddenly, he looks a lot less like a Batman villain, and a lot more like a horror movie icon. The Master of Fear finally had a look that was fear-inducing, and it worked on so many levels. The designs were really symbolic of the show itself. Some of what they did worked, and some of what they did didn't. And the changes they made didn't end at the characters' appearances either. While most of the cast returned from Batman the Animated Series, there were still some replacements throughout. The Scarecrow's scary new look was complemented by a scary new voice actor in Jeffrey Combs. The part was previously played by Henry Pollock, who gave the Bad Doctor a very ghoulish-sounding voice. I wouldn't say he came off as scary, but he did come off as someone who took pleasure in other people's misery. It's a great performance in its own right, but man, this was really a complete reimagining. The Scarecrow doesn't sound like a theater kid with a flair for fear. He sounds like the human embodiment of fear. Tara Strong replaces Melissa Gilbert as the voice of Batgirl, which, in my opinion, was a major upgrade. Tara really brought a much more youthful energy to the role, and just felt more natural in the part than Melissa had. Gilbert was good in her own right, but I really believe that Tara Strong made this role her own. Brooks Gardner replaces Erin Kincaid as the voice of Killer Croc, which I'll get into more in a bit. There are changes even in things that seemingly stayed the same. In some cases, even when actors returned to their roles, it didn't necessarily mean a return to form. For example, when Henry Silva came back to voice Bane once again, for some reason his accent didn't join him, going from sounding Latin American to just American, I guess? The iconic Kevin Conroy returns to the role of both Bruce Wayne and Batman, but he does so making his Bruce Wayne his Batman. Previously, there was a separation of sorts between the man's public persona and his private personality. There was definitely a clear distinction that was made. This time around, for whatever reason, that nuance was forgotten, and now he was just Batman all the time, in and out of costume. The second show continued to propel and progress the universe forward, by both introducing and creating new threats to this timeline. And sure, not all of the new characters were standouts. You had Farmer Brown, who was a guy whose food mutates Gotham's wildlife, Roxy Rocket, an adrenaline junkie and thrill seeker whose lust for life goes outside the range of good taste. These weren't the best of the best. However, to their credit, I would still probably hold them over some of BTAS's worst. Yeah, sure, they may be a step down from Harley Quinn and the Joker, but they have to be seen as a step up from Boss Biggest and the Sewer King. It's a low bar to set, but they're over that bar, is my point. Calendar Girl was a character who acts both as a gender-swapped iteration of Calendar Man, but also a recreation of Mannequin. While her love for anniversary-based crimes, as well as her name, are reminiscent of Calendar Man, her backstory of being a retired model who suffers from body dysmorphia, causing her to commit crimes behind a mask, is taken straight from Mannequin. You had Firefly, who was a love-struck madman with a fondness for fire, looking to set Gotham City ablaze and get his revenge on the woman who rejected him. These comic characters brought to the cartoon were alright. Again, I wouldn't put them up there with characters like Two-Face or Poison Ivy, but they're probably on the same tier as a Lockup or the Ventriloquist. Then you have the addition of characters like Etrick and the Demon, portrayed by the one true handsome Billy Zane, and much more importantly, the character of the Creeper. A character who I personally believe, still to this day, is highly underrated. He was essentially a glimpse into what the Joker on the opposite side of the hero-villain spectrum would look like. I wouldn't say he stood for good, but his targets were usually bad, so that kinda evened things out. The character did feel like he was made from the ribs of the Clown Prince of Crime. That point is only further exasperated when you realize that he was created by the Clown Prince of Crime and this is a rip. The Creeper's somewhere on the scale of Looney Tunes. He was like pre-Freakazoid, but post-Mask. Like with Harvey Dent on Batman the Animated Series, this show sets the character up before he inevitably faces tragedy. Shown to be a reporter in the background of several episodes, before he eventually crosses paths with the Joker. For reference, this character did exist in the comics prior to his inclusion in the show, but the show made significant changes to his backstory in order to factor the Joker in. The Creeper had the hots for Harley and acted as that generation's Pepe Le Pew. He wasn't a figure of bad or good, so much as a figure of absolute chaos. He didn't mean any harm in the things that he were doing, but he also didn't mind looting or disturbing the peace. He felt very comedic, like a wacky Tiny Toons creation. Interestingly enough, he was voiced by Jeff Bennett, who would years later play the Joker himself in Batman the Brave and the Bold. The show introduces audiences to a brand new Robin in Tim Drake, who is really just Tim Drake in name only and Jason Todd in just about everything else. Being that the first show began with Dick Grayson already being a college student, this is a whole new experience. This boy wonder was pretty much still a boy, whereas Dick Grayson was almost a full-grown man, and up until his exit was pretty much the perfect sidekick. Aside from the occasional outbursts brought on by trauma, Tim Drake, on the other hand, was immature and rough around the edges. As a matter of fact, he wasn't given the role of Robin so much as he just stole the costume and declared himself Robin. Having this street kid taken under the Bat's wing made for a completely different dynamic for this dynamic duo. We see Bruce take on more of a fatherly role with Tim, whereas he was always shown to be more of an equal with Dick. A mentor maybe, but it wasn't often that we saw him in a parental role with the college student, outside of that really emotional episode Robin's Reckoning. In Batman the Animated Series, Robin sort of felt like he was his own hero. He was just about ready to leave the cave, so to speak. But Robin in the new Batman Adventures is just starting off. He still needs the training. I really appreciate that they differentiated the sidekicks. It's very easy to confuse boy wonders elsewhere because most of the time they look alike. Similar hairstyles, wardrobes, purposes, but you're never going to mistake one for the other here, even if some of the toy makers did. They don't just have different looks, but they're in fact totally different people. Tim Drake's personality is both a fault and function of the character. Sure, his sarcastic wit adds to his charm, but his cockiness clouds his judgment and puts him in harm's way more often than not. He was a fun new addition that I think really led to a whole lot of new creative opportunities, which is why one of my favorite moments of the season was when the past and present Robins met up and really got the chance to bond. The story's based on a comic that I really happen to love, and I think they perfectly recreated that story while also adjusting it to better suit the show. With Dick's departure from the role of Robin came his evolution into the character Nightwing. Yes, our little Robin finally flew the coop and stepped up to main hero status. No longer was he at the Dark Knight's side. Most of the time, he wasn't even in the Dark Knight's Rolodex. After all these years, Nightwing was his own hero. His own hero who had his own missions, his own agendas, and his own way of getting the job done. And sometimes those methods would conflict with the Caped Crusader. But that didn't faze him because he was no longer a member of the Bat family, only affiliating with them when necessary. While there's definitely a rift between the former team, it's nice to see that there's still a lot of love there nonetheless, with Nightwing forgiving Bruce, training Tim, and even coming through when they need his assistance. It's nice to see this boy wonder finally be a man, and more importantly, be his own man. Though, unfortunately, there's really not a lot to say about him, if only because he's not shown all that often. While I would have loved to see more Nightwing, he was genuinely my favorite character at the time, I do think his unique schedule on the show sort of preserved him and added to his mystique. A Nightwing appearance on the new Batman Adventures felt special. You knew something had to be going down if they were calling him in. In contrast, Batgirl, who was once an occasional accomplice to the team, has become a full-fledged member of the Bat family. In a sense, sort of replacing Dick in the role of sidekick. Even with the addition of a new Robin, Batgirl is at Batman's side more than anyone else in these episodes, acting as the Caped Crusader's primary protege. If I'm being honest, I actually think the contrast in their personalities perfectly complement each other. Their back and forth banter is terrific here, and it feels like they have much more of a relationship than they had previously. It's almost too much of a relationship. But we'll get into that later. But Barbara also showcases one of the series' most sentimental moments, fessing up to her father about her nightly secret identity, and silently gives his approval, basically stating that he's known about her nightlife all along. There's a whole slew of new developments with the Rogues Gallery. Killer Croc has seemingly gotten smarter with age. Though he's still shown to be a bit of a dummy, he's not the brainless brute he's been in the past. He's capable of thinking for himself, even if it's at the shallow end of the thought pool. At least he's getting his feet wet. Penguin's criminal days are seemingly behind him, as he now runs the Iceberg Lounge, a restaurant/bar for the elite upper class and the criminal underworld. If you have the money, you're welcome inside. He does not discriminate. Of course, he's not truly reformed. He's just now more cautious with the way he commits his crimes. Clayface's powers are rapidly progressing, with him now having the ability of creating separate sentient life. The disease that caused Mr. Freeze's condition has advanced, destroying his body in the process. He now lives the remainder of his days in a mech suit with a detachable head with spider legs, which has kind of always reminded me of the villain from The Mask. Two-Face's mental illness has only gotten more complicated, developing a split personality. As strange as it seems, Two-Face is now of three minds on every subject, as he's now acting out outside of his usual acting out, taking on the vigilante-like presence of the judge, prosecuting his fellow criminals for their crimes. While this was a Batman show, it wasn't a Batman exclusive show. This series was more a show about Gotham City and its inhabitants, and just in general the universe that they were setting up. These 2 seasons saw more crossover and team-ups than any had before, sometimes introducing the characters of Batman the Animated Series to some of the characters from Superman the Animated Series. These made these episodes feel more like events. This wasn't just some random filler episode. This was a crisis on multiple shows. It was nice to see these worlds collide, and in some cases, clash. It just made everything feel like it was a part of something bigger. In terms of world building, I think this definitely has to have a one-up on what came before it. There seems to be this notion that this show was significantly lighter than its predecessor, and I don't think that that could be any further from the truth. I would even argue that the new Batman Adventures gave audiences some of the series' darkest moments. Some of the darkest moments on either show. We see the breakup of the original Batman and Robin, with Robin becoming more and more alienated with the Dark Knight's increasingly cold demeanor. Batman threatens a criminal in front of his family, including his young son who attempts to defend his father. In response, Robin rejects the brutality of the Bat, and his issues at home begin to factor into his relationship with Barbara. In trying to repair the situation, Bruce reveals his secret identity to Barbara Gordon, letting her know that he knows hers as well. But after being left out of the show and tell, that only infuriates Robin that much more. Robin breaks things off with both of them, ending his relationship with Barbara and ending his historic partnership by knocking down the man who taught him how to throw a punch. We see a man knock down his father figure, and one of the most iconic teams ripped apart. In another episode, Robin helps an amnesiac named Annie. The two bond, and the young girl and the boy Wonder quickly hit it off and become friends. Annie's confused about the world around her, but she finds comfort in Robin. In seeking her identity, she eventually finds out to her own heartbreak that she's been molded by Clayface, only made as a means of survival. Ultimately, Annie sacrifices herself in an attempt to save her savior, dying never knowing if she was ever truly alive to begin with. The episode Over the Edge opens up with Batgirl falling to her death, crashing through the hood of her father's cop car. The commissioner unmasks the hero and through tears watches as his daughter dies in his arms. This leads to Jim taking up a vendetta with the vigilante, finding the Dark Knight's secret identity and sending his whole squad after him and all those who know him. Even going so far as making a deal with the assassin-for-hired Bane before being fired from the GCPD. Joker and Harley always put the fun in dysfunctional. Their relationship was never meant to be ideal, and it certainly wasn't. They were never going to be a goal for fans to strive for, but their toxic and abusive nature was always shown in passing. Their history was lightly referenced in the show's later years, but we wouldn't see Harley's true horrific origin until the episode Mad Love. Through careful manipulation, the Joker corrupted her character, turned her into an accessory for himself, and carelessly discarded her every chance he got. In response to this, Harley acts out and blames Batman, not the Joker, for her pain, deciding that the Joker's obsession with the Dark Knight is what causes her such heartache. She tries and nearly succeeds in offing the Caped Crusader, only for the Joker to act out of jealousy and knock her out a window. Her story ends with her still blaming herself for her actions, silently apologizing as she passes out. The new Batman adventures didn't shy away from tragedy. They just further incorporated triumph and fun. The series premiere showcased several short stories centered around the holiday season, including, but not limited to, Harley and Ivy brainwashing Bruce Wayne via lipstick so that he could buy them Christmas presents. The show's second season sees a group of kids, who all just so happen to resemble a different Robin, give their own take on what Batman must be like. An episode which includes nostalgic nods to past iterations of the hero. It also gave us an episode that saw Gotham girls Harley and Ivy team up with Metropolis problem child Livewire, with the three becoming an issue for everyone they encountered. I think these years of Batman's past deserve much more love than they've gotten. Sure, they made a few mistakes along the way, but for every one goof, there's at least 5 things good. Personally, I think this was taken a little bit before its time. Allegedly, this series ended because the creators ran out of ideas for stories. But with the years of comics to choose from, some of which they had already pulled from these seasons, plus the endless amount of characters that this universe had already introduced, it feels like there was still much more to do. But then again, that's probably why still there's so much being done with these characters 2 decades later. And that was the new Batman Adventures. So if you like this video and would be interested in seeing a second part to it, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
"That's Batman."
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.